I moved to Gettysburg. I don't know how much of a biography to give, but let me simply say since 1977 I've been working at Gettysburg College, first as chaplain and then director of a Center for Public Service, which has set up programs throughout the college to give students experiences of realities they would not otherwise encounter. I'm equal part Mattson and Bergendorf, which is a rather interesting credential given the subject matter of this conference and led to some rather interesting family life, only a little bit of which will I refer to in the talk. But this is a talk about A.D. Mattson and who he is, or who he was. I'm sure some of you remember him. He was a big man. Some say he was a little peculiar looking. In all the pictures, he had this very high forehead with that great sheaf of hair perched on top. He had a kind of slow smile, you will recall. My wife always thought of him as a gentle person. He was comfortable with students, easily available in the refectory, and as you've just heard, at Bender's Cafe, finding a certain pleasure in arguing with high church students about their priestly tendencies, and fundamentalists about their textual inconsistencies. When A.D. was offended, he could be a bulldog in the defense, as when, for example, a former pastor meddled in his congregation at St. James, Minnesota, or when the mayor of Rock Island refused to act on a sign that was somehow badly placed and ruining A.D.'s property values here in Rock Island. As a kid, A.D. would always show up at our house after lunch for coffee, often not saying much. And he continued these daily visits with one or the other members of our family after his wife and my father died. In his loneliness, perhaps needing a rather constant contact with family, we had a summer place in Hackensack, Minnesota, and he built a place near us to continue that contact. By the time I knew A.D., or from my memories of A.D., some of the prophetic fire was certainly gone, and I had to reconstruct both through records and my imagination what it must have been like in the 30s. As we all know, often his classes were just plain dull, as he read from one or the other of the books. And you were either thankful if someone provoked him to one of his favorite topics, or you were irritated because it was interrupting your reveries. He was a bit of a health nut. I don't know if you knew this or not. He was forever making some sort of juice out of some sort of vegetable or fruit, some of which proved slightly intoxicating. He was an addict of Vermont medicine, honey, and vinegar concoctions, which some say contributed to his death in 1970. There's a story that epitomizes my experience of A.D. On occasion when I was in high school, we came here in '48, I used to travel with A.D. when he was organizing for farmers' labor. And we would go from one small white frame church to another, filled with whole families of farmers, a family to a pew. That's what's in my mind. Men in bib overalls and women in simple dresses, all together with A.D. trying to devise a strategy to resist the agribusinesses and the huge economic forces that were driving them off the family farm. Later on, I attached Amos's exclamation to these scenes, the pathetic lamentation, How can Jacob stand? He is so small. Now, the first job my wife and I had after we were married in 1957 was working for the National Lutheran Council under Conrad Hoyer. Working in Aurora, Minnesota, with some of this same class of farmers, some recently dispossessed, now essentially migrants, living in small rental trailers in a bulldozed clearing in the forest, sometimes a dozen people to a trailer, sometimes kids in crates, building the taconite industry for Bethlehem Steel, which company provided no social service whatsoever. And I would remember AD quoting Isaiah 5:8, "Woe to those of you who join house to house and field to field until there is no more room in the land." Now, in that story we see the texts and the symbols, the institutions and the practices, the ideas and the metaphors that AD embodied and manipulated in his life and ministry. As Cornel West says, all we basically have are traditions, each dynamic, malleable, and revisable. And what we want to do together this morning is to show AD's workmanship in this regard. A tradition is a stream of energy in a way that passes through generations. A tradition is a stage which legitimizes and supports a reconstructive performance of that tradition. And we want to try to analyze AD's performance within the context of certain traditions, and to do so in such a way that connects his performance with our situation today. Now, Kristen and I have identified 5 traditions. There are others, but these 5 we identified, each interrelated. Above all, AD was the product of the tradition that we represent here, the Swedish Lutheran immigrant tradition, as it was experienced in a semi-itinerant pastor's home, largely on the prairies. A tradition beginning with peasants fleeing little agricultural villages in Sweden because of a collapsing European system, economic system, and fleeing to agricultural opportunities in the American West. The second tradition is the milieu and teaching tradition of Yale University, which was instrumental in AD's development. Its impact far beyond the 6 courses that he took while he was pastor in Ansonia and West Haven, Connecticut, succeeding, of all people, Virgilius Firm. Thirdly, AD was a practitioner of the theology of the kingdom of God. He said that in his inaugural lecture in 1931. I quote, to the advancement of the ends and interests of the kingdom, I dedicate my efforts as professor in Augustana Theological Seminary. Fourthly, AD was part of the American social gospel movement, which evolved from a certain understanding of the kingdom of God in America. And fifthly, AD's essential strategy and source of energy for his Christian life was boundary crossing, breaking through established patterns in response to perceived need. As per his favorite parable, that of the Good Samaritan crossing over some sort of boundary to the other side.